It started as a dare. My friends, Mike and Ethan, had been hyping up this old urban legend about a clown that supposedly haunted the woods outside our small town. We'd all grown up hearing stories about him, a guy dressed as a clown who would appear in the woods at night, just standing there, watching. No one had ever gotten too close, or so the stories went, but people swore they'd seen him. The sightings had died down in recent years, but the idea of it still gave me the creeps. Naturally, Mike thought it would be hilarious to go looking for him. "Come on, Jake," he said, smirking as we piled into his beat-up truck. "It's probably just some old drunk in a costume. Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" I rolled my eyes but went along with it. It was a Friday night, and we didn't have anything better to do. Ethan brought his dad's old flashlight, and I grabbed my phone, figuring I'd film anything remotely creepy for laughs later. The woods were about a 15-minute drive from town, a patch of dense trees with no trails and plenty of local legends to keep people away. By the time we got there, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the shadows were stretching long across the ground. The air felt cooler here, quieter. "All right, let's find this clown," Mike said as we climbed out of the truck, his voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. Ethan laughed nervously. "If we see him, we're leaving, right? Like, we're not actually getting close to him." "Relax," Mike said, slapping him on the back. "The guy's probably not even real." We started walking, the flashlight beam bouncing off the trees as we made our way deeper into the woods. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. Mike was in his element, cracking jokes and deliberately stepping on branches to make us jump. Ethan stuck close to me, his grip on the flashlight white-knuckled. About 20 minutes in, we found the clearing. It was a small, circular patch of open ground surrounded by tall, gnarled trees. The grass was overgrown, and in the center of the clearing stood an old, rusted swing set, its chains swaying slightly in the breeze. "This is it," Mike said, his voice quieter now. "This is where people say they've seen him." Ethan shone the flashlight around, his breath hitching when the beam landed on the swing set. "That thing's creepy as hell." We stood there for a while, listening, waiting. Nothing happened. Just the wind rustling through the trees and the faint creak of the swing chains. "Guess the clown's off tonight," I said, trying to keep my voice light. And then we heard it. A laugh. It was faint at first, almost like the sound of wind whistling through the trees. But it grew louder, sharper, and unmistakably human. A deep, guttural chuckle that sent chills racing down my spine. We froze, staring at each other, our breaths visible in the cool night air. The laughter echoed again, this time from the other side of the clearing. "Did you hear that?" Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. "Yeah," I said, gripping my phone tightly. The laugh came again, closer now. And then, from the edge of the clearing, we saw him. The clown. He was tall, his figure looming in the darkness. His costume was filthy, the once bright colors dulled by dirt and age. His face was painted white, the red of his lips smeared into a grotesque grin. He held a balloon in one hand, its string limp in the still air. And he was staring right at us. None of us moved. None of us spoke. We just stood there, frozen, as he took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Run," Mike whispered. The clown laughed again, louder this time, and broke into a sprint. We bolted. I don't even remember deciding to run, it was pure instinct. The clown's laughter echoed through the woods, growing louder, more maniacal, as we crashed through the underbrush. Ethan's flashlight bounced wildly, casting erratic beams of light that only made the shadows seem more alive. "Keep going," Mike yelled, his voice breaking with panic. Branches clawed at my arms and face, and the damp ground threatened to trip me with every uneven step. Behind us, the laughter didn't stop. It wasn't like a person laughing, it was deeper, distorted, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear the heavy crunch of footsteps chasing us, closing the distance. "Where's the truck?" Ethan gasped, his breathing ragged. "It's back that way." Mike pointed, veering left. "Come on." I followed him, the adrenaline pounding in my veins like a drum. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. I didn't want to know what would happen if I did. Ethan was lagging behind, his flashlight beam swinging wildly as he stumbled. "Ethan, move!" I shouted, glancing back for the first time. The clown was closer than I'd expected, his grotesque grin illuminated by the bouncing light. His balloon was gone, but in his hand, he held something long and metallic, a rusted crowbar. My stomach dropped. "Run faster!" I yelled. Ethan tripped, hitting the ground hard with a yelp. Mike and I skidded to a stop, our instincts warring with the need to help our friend. The clown slowed, his laughter turning into a low, guttural hum as he stepped closer. "Get up!" I screamed, rushing to Ethan and hauling him to his feet. His flashlight was gone, swallowed by the darkness, but we didn't have time to look for it. Mike grabbed a large branch from the ground, brandishing it like a weapon. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice shaking. The clown stopped, tilting his head like he was amused. He tapped the crowbar against the ground, the metallic clang echoing through the trees. Then, without warning, he lunged. "Run!" Mike yelled, shoving us forward as he swung the branch. I didn't want to leave him, but my legs moved on their own, dragging Ethan with me. Behind us, I heard the sound of wood splintering, followed by a guttural grunt. "Mike!" I screamed, but he didn't answer. The truck was just ahead, its rusted frame gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I shoved Ethan toward it, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them, but I managed to unlock the door and yank it open. "Get in!" I yelled. Ethan scrambled into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind him. I jumped in after him, shoving the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, refusing to start. Come on," I muttered, turning the key again. The engine roared to life just as the clown emerged from the trees, his face illuminated by the headlights. His grin was impossibly wide, his eyes glinting with a sick kind of glee. "Go!" Ethan screamed. I slammed the truck into reverse, the tires kicking up dirt and leaves as we sped backward. The clown didn't chase us this time, he just stood there, watching, his head tilting slightly as the truck's headlights framed his figure. The image burned itself into my mind, the torn costume, the smeared makeup, the crowbar hanging loosely in his hand. As soon as we hit the main road, I floored it. Neither of us spoke for a long time, the only sound the rumble of the engine and our ragged breathing. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck steady. "We left him," I whispered finally, my voice hollow. "We left Mike." Ethan didn't respond. He just stared out the window, his face pale and drawn. When we got back to town, we went straight to the police. They didn't believe us at first, chalking it up to a prank or a drunken misadventure. But when they went to the woods the next morning, they found the clearing. The swing set was still there, its chains swaying gently in the breeze. Near the base of one of the swings, they found a branch, splintered and bloodied. But there was no sign of Mike. Or the clown. Weeks passed, and Mike never came home. His disappearance was ruled suspicious, but the case went cold. Ethan and I stopped talking after that night. I think it was too painful for both of us. I moved out of town a few months later, trying to leave the memories behind. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that laughter. And when I close my eyes, I see the clown standing at the edge of the clearing, his crooked grin seared into my mind forever. I never liked clowns. There was something about their painted-on smiles and exaggerated features that always unsettled me, even as a kid. But I'd never thought much about it until last summer, when I saw one up close. It was late July, and my girlfriend Sarah had dragged me to the traveling carnival that rolled into town every year. The kind of place with rickety rides, overpriced funnel cakes, and booths rigged to make sure you never win. Sarah loved the atmosphere, the bright lights, the music, the chaos of it all. I went along because I loved her. The carnival was packed that night, the smell of fried food hanging heavy in the air as kids ran past with cotton candy and parents struggled to keep up. We spent the first hour hopping between rides and games, and by the time we reached the far end of the carnival, the crowds had started to thin. That's when I saw it. The clown. He wasn't like the other performers wandering the carnival. Most of them had balloon animals or oversized shoes and looked goofy enough to fit the family-friendly vibe. This guy, though, he was different. His costume was darker, almost gothic, with deep crimson trim and black lace cuffs. His face was painted white, but his makeup was smeared, his black lipstick curving into an uneven grin that stretched just a little too wide. He wasn't entertaining anyone. He just stood there, leaning against the side of a booth, watching the crowd. His head turned slightly as people passed, his painted eyes following them without blinking. Creepy, huh? Sarah said, nudging me with her elbow. Yeah, I muttered, unable to look away. The clown's gaze shifted then, locking onto mine. His grin widened, and I swear I saw his lips twitch, like he was about to say something. I grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward the Ferris wheel. Let's keep moving. She laughed, but I could tell she'd noticed the guy too. We didn't talk about it, but the unease lingered. The rest of the night felt off. The lights seemed dimmer, the music a little too loud, the shadows in the corners a little too dark. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. The carnival was winding down, the crowds thinning to a handful of stragglers. Sarah wanted one last funnel cake, so I left her at the stand while I went to the car to grab my wallet. The parking lot was nearly empty, the carnival lights casting a faint glow over the rows of cars. That's when I saw him again. The clown. He was standing near the edge of the lot, half hidden in the shadows of a tree. His head tilted slightly as he watched me, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The smeared makeup on his face made his grin look like it had been carved into his skin. I froze, my stomach twisting into knots. Can I help you? I called out, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just stood there, his grin never faltering. I backed away, fumbling for my phone, but when I looked back up, he was gone. The spot where he'd been was empty, the shadows undisturbed. My heart was pounding as I grabbed the wallet from the car and hurried back to Sarah. She noticed my face as soon as I got to the stand. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile. Let's go. We left the carnival without looking back, but the image of the clown stayed with me, his painted face burned into my memory. I told myself it was just some guy trying to creep people out, part of the act. But something about the way he watched me felt personal. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his grin, his hollow stare, the way he stood perfectly still. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I saw the balloon. It was tied to the handle of the front door. A single, red balloon swaying gently in the breeze. I stared at the balloon, my chest tightening with a mix of fear and disbelief. It swayed softly in the night breeze, the string tied neatly to the front door handle. I hadn't seen it when we got home, there was no way I could have missed it. My hand trembled as I reached for the lock, half expecting to see something, or someone, waiting outside. The street was empty. The faint glow of the streetlights illuminated the quiet neighborhood, and everything looked normal. No sign of anyone nearby, no shadowy figure in the distance. Just the balloon, bobbing gently in the breeze. I untied it and brought it inside, locking the door behind me. The knot was precise, tight enough that it must have taken effort to tie. The balloon itself was unremarkable, just a cheap red party balloon you could get at any store. But attached to the string was a small piece of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it with shaking hands. We're not done yet. I dropped the note, my heart hammering in my chest. My first thought was to wake Sarah, but I didn't want to scare her, at least, not until I was sure of what was going on. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, double-checked all the locks, and sat in the living room with my back to the wall. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge. I told myself it was just a prank, some carnival employee trying to get under my skin. But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 4 a.m., I heard it. A faint rustling, like fabric brushing against wood. It was coming from the back of the house. My grip on the knife tightened as I crept down the hallway, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The sound grew louder, more distinct, someone was moving around in the backyard. I peeked through the blinds, my breath catching in my throat. The clown was there. He was standing just outside the back door, his grotesque grin illuminated by the motion sensor light. His hands were empty this time, but the way he tilted his head, staring directly at me, made my skin crawl. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. "Sarah!" I yelled, my voice cracking. She appeared in the hallway moments later, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" "He's here," I said, pointing toward the back door. "The clown from the carnival." Her face paled as she hurried to the window. But when she looked, the yard was empty. The motion light was still on, casting long shadows across the grass, but the clown was gone. "I swear he was there," I said, my voice shaky. "Right there." Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip firm. "We're calling the police." She was already dialing as I locked the back door and pulled the blinds shut. I stayed close to her, my ears straining for any sound outside. The operator assured us that officers were on their way, but those minutes felt like hours. When the police arrived, they searched the yard and the surrounding area but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. One of the officers, a gruff, skeptical guy who looked like he'd heard every story in the book, pulled me aside. "You sure it wasn't just your imagination?" he asked. "Late night, creepy carnival, maybe you spooked yourself." I didn't argue. I could tell he didn't believe me, and honestly, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. But as the officers left, I caught sight of something glinting in the bushes near the back fence. A balloon string. The next few days were a blur. Sarah stayed with me, too afraid to go back to her place. I called out of work, barely sleeping, jumping at every noise. I kept telling myself it was over, that the clown wouldn't come back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed. It was nearly midnight, and Sarah was asleep in the guest room. The screen showed a text from an unknown number. "Come outside." My stomach twisted. I typed back, my hands shaking, "Who is this?" The response came immediately, "You know who." I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the window, peeking through the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything, just the empty street and the faint glow of the streetlights. But then I spotted it, a figure standing under the lamppost at the end of the block. The clown. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his head tilted, his grin stretched wide. Even from a distance, I could feel his eyes on me. He raised one hand slowly, pointing directly at my window. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice trembling as I told them what was happening. They assured me they'd send someone over, but I didn't wait. I shook Sarah awake and told her we were leaving. We grabbed our bags and bolted for the car. As we backed out of the driveway, I glanced toward the lamppost. The clown was gone. The police never found him. They told me it was probably a prank, that someone at the carnival had taken things too far. But I knew better. The look in his eyes, the way he moved, it wasn't just a guy in a costume. We stayed at a hotel that night, but I barely slept. I kept expecting to hear the sound of balloons popping or that guttural laugh echoing through the halls. The next morning, as we checked out, the receptionist handed me an envelope. "Someone left this for you," she said, smiling politely. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid, slightly smudged. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my house. In the photo, I was standing at the window, staring out into the night. And scrawled across the bottom in black ink were 2 words. "See you." I've never been a fan of clowns. There's something about the painted smiles and oversized shoes that always felt off to me, even as a kid. But what happened last fall made my mild discomfort turn into something worse, something I still can't shake. It started on a Saturday night. My girlfriend, Emily, had gone out of town for a family wedding, leaving me home alone for the weekend. Our house was on the edge of a small town, with a single streetlight marking the corner of our block. It was the kind of quiet neighborhood where nothing much happens, where you leave your doors unlocked and know your neighbors by name. That night, I decided to stay in. It was chilly, with a light drizzle tapping against the windows, so I ordered a pizza and settled on the couch with my PlayStation. By 10 p.m., the rain had picked up, and the sound of water pattering on the roof mixed with the muffled hum of the game. The house felt cozy, safe. Until the doorbell rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not this late. I paused the game and stood, listening. The rain made it hard to hear, but the faint creak of the porch confirmed someone was there. I grabbed my phone and headed to the door, peering through the peephole. At first, I didn't see anything, just the wet porch and the dim glow of the streetlight beyond. I was about to shrug it off as a prank when a flash of movement caught my eye. A figure stood just off to the side of the porch, partially obscured by the edge of the window. It was a clown. At first, I thought it was a joke, some teenager messing around with a costume. The clown was tall, his white painted face split into a grotesque grin. His costume was old, faded red and yellow with dirt smudges and frayed edges. He didn't move, didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring straight at the door. "Can I help you?" I called out, my voice more annoyed than scared. No response. He tilted his head slightly, the movement slow and deliberate, like he was studying me. "Look, I'm not in the mood for this," I said, my nerves prickling. "You've got the wrong house." The clown took a single step closer, his face now fully visible through the window. His grin seemed wider, his painted lips curling unnaturally as he raised a hand and tapped on the glass with one finger. Tap. 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 My stomach churned. I backed away from the door, fumbling for my phone to call the police. The clown didn't move, he just kept tapping, the sound deliberate and rhythmic. When I glanced back at the window, he was gone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The porch was empty. The rain had picked up, but the streetlight cast enough of a glow for me to see the yard clearly. There was no sign of him. I locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt, and drew the curtains tight. My pulse was racing, but I tried to convince myself it was just some idiot pulling a prank. I even laughed nervously, shaking my head as I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat back on the couch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. An hour later, just as I was starting to relax, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Did you like my knock?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. How did he get my number? My hands trembled as I typed back. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'm closer than you think." I shot up from the couch, my eyes darting to the windows. The curtains were drawn, but the room suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. Should I call the cops? Should I leave? Then I heard it. A faint squeaking sound, coming from outside. It was slow, methodical, like someone dragging something heavy across the wet pavement. I crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek out. The clown was standing at the edge of the streetlight, his back to me. He was holding something, a large, old-fashioned balloon cart. The kind you'd see at a circus decades ago, with peeling paint and rusty wheels. He bent over it, rummaging through the compartments, his movements jerky and unnatural. I grabbed my phone and started dialing 911, but before I could hit call, he stopped. Slowly, he turned to face the house, his dark eyes locking onto mine through the sliver of the curtain. And then he smiled. His grin was impossibly wide, the smeared red paint on his lips stretching into something that didn't seem human. The clown stood motionless under the streetlight, the balloon cart by his side, illuminated by the faint glow of the lamp. The rain made his costume cling to his frame, and the way he tilted his head, like he knew I was watching, made my skin crawl. I dropped the curtain and backed away from the window, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My phone was still in my hand, and I hit 911 without hesitation. The operator answered quickly, her calm voice a stark contrast to the panic rising in my chest. "There's someone outside my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A clown. He's just standing there, staring." "Is he attempting to enter your home?" she asked. "No, but he was on my porch earlier. Now he's by the streetlight with a cart or something." "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way," she assured me. I stayed by the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. The clown hadn't moved. He was still standing under the light, but now he was holding something in his hands, a single balloon. It bobbed gently in the rain, its string trailing toward the ground. I couldn't take my eyes off him. The stillness, the way he stared at the house, it wasn't normal. He didn't feel like a prank or a person trying to scare me for fun. There was an intent behind his presence, something dark and deliberate. The squeaking sound started again. The clown began to move, dragging the balloon cart across the pavement. His movements were slow, each step deliberate, as he made his way toward the house. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt tight. My fingers gripped the phone so hard it felt like it might shatter. "He's coming closer," I whispered to the operator. Stay inside. Lock all your doors and windows, she said. The officers are less than 5 minutes away. The clown stopped at the edge of the yard. The balloon cart was now just a few feet from my porch, its wheels dripping with rain. He reached into the cart and pulled something out, a long, jagged object that glinted faintly in the streetlight. It took me a moment to realize what it was. A knife. I stumbled back from the window, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I could hear him now, his boots crunching against the gravel as he stepped onto the lawn. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, almost polite. 3 gentle taps on the front door. Tap. 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 I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knocking came again, harder this time. Tap. 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 Officers are almost there, the operator said in my ear. Stay where you are. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. The silence was deafening, the kind that makes your ears ring. I crept back to the window, my hands trembling, and peeked out. The clown was gone. The yard was empty, the balloon cart abandoned near the porch. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the streetlight flickered faintly in the distance. I scanned the yard, the street, even the shadows near the trees, but there was no sign of him. That's when I heard it. A faint creak coming from inside the house. My blood ran cold. I turned toward the hallway, the dim light barely reaching the shadows at the end. The creak came again, louder this time, like a floorboard bending under someone's weight. He's inside, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Stay on the line, the operator said. The officers are pulling up now. I heard the faint wail of sirens outside, but they felt miles away. The creaking grew closer, slow and deliberate, like footsteps. I backed into the corner of the living room, clutching a heavy lamp from the side table, my phone still pressed to my ear. The footsteps stopped. And then the clown's face appeared in the doorway. His grin was wider than before, the red paint smeared like blood. His eyes were fixed on mine, unblinking, as he stepped into the room. The knife in his hand gleamed faintly, and his chest rose and fell with each deliberate breath. I screamed, throwing the lamp as hard as I could. It shattered against the wall, missing him by inches, but the sound seemed to startle him. He paused, his head tilting as if he were considering his next move. Then the sirens grew louder, and the sound of car doors slamming outside broke the tension. The clown's grin faltered for the first time, and without a word, he turned and bolted toward the back door. I heard the officers shouting as they entered the house, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. By the time they reached me, the clown was gone. The police searched the area for hours but found no trace of him. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, nothing. Even the balloon cart had disappeared. They told me it was probably a prank, that someone had been watching too many scary movies. But I knew better. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every shadow at the edge of my vision made my skin crawl. I moved out of that house a month later, but the memory stayed with me. The worst part? 2 weeks after the incident, I found something tied to the handle of my new front door. A single red balloon.